David Cameron's efforts to secure major EU reforms ahead of the promised referendum on British membership met with mixed results last week. The French and the Polish were hostile, while the Germans seem to have changed their tune, which was music to Mr Cameron's ears. But there's still plenty of hard bargaining and diplomatic shuttling ahead. And I'm joined now from Lisbon by José Manuel Barroso, who was President of the European Commission for a decade until last year. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Mr Barroso. If it is
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you.
As always, if it's crucial to David Cameron's strategy to remove the rights to tax credits from foreign workers coming into the EU, in your understanding, does that require treaty change and is it a goer?
I don't know exactly what is going to be the proposal of Prime Minister Cameron. There are some possibilities to make changes in the regime for, let's say, benefits for people from other parts of the Union, but without changing the treaties, certainly it's much more difficult to make any important change. So it depends on the concrete nature, from a legal point of view, of the proposal that the British government wants to make. And I cannot comment on that because I have not yet seen that proposal.
Because, as I understand it, the crucial issue is people who are in work and in Britain get quite generous tax breaks, and whether they could be treated differently because they come from outside Britain to workers in Britain. That would be discriminatory, I think, in the EU's current legal framework, and therefore would require a big change.
Yes. In principle, the freedom of movement is against any kind of discrimination. So this is a principle that is in the treaties. And of course, it cannot be accepted now, a change on that principle by the other countries or by the European institutions. And so this is a very clear principle in our treaties, the principle of freedom of movement and the principle of non-discrimination.
So
Having said that, if there are abuses, for instance, the social benefit system, it's certainly possible to accept changes, and indeed we have started some time ago to fight against those abuses of the social systems that there exist in some country, and they are, of course, against the general philosophy of our, let's say, system that is a system of freedom of movement and non-discrimination among European Union citizens.
Now, some of the other things we know David Cameron would like to achieve is to get Britain out of the ever closer union phrase, and also there's a lot of talk in Britain about national parliaments getting stronger, as it were, red card powers if they don't like EU legislation. What do you think of those two proposals? Are they plausible things to win from these negotiations?
These are more sensitive issues in terms of the treaty, because the ever closer union reference, it's a kind of a political statement, really, very general, is in the treaty. So to put it out will require a change in the treaty. It will require unanimity. This treaty, as you know, was approved, ratified, by all the countries, including Britain. So if now Britain wants to change it, it's going to be more complex because it requires all the other countries that also have their own parliaments and their own sensitivities to change that part of the treaty, that article in the treaty.
So
Concerning the role of the national parliaments, already the Lisbon Treaty, the current treaty, has accepted the stronger role for the national parliaments. And so this is certainly a welcome thing, provided, of course, it is done in accordance with the rules that were approved by all the countries in the European Union.
So we have a real problem here, which is that a lot of the things, the key things that David Cameron wants, clearly need treaty change. And we've heard from Paris, for instance, that the French are very against another treaty in the timescale that we're talking about. Therefore, given that, I mean, you're a great Anglophile, you want Britain to stay inside the EU, what would you be suggesting as a way for David Cameron to gain enough face, gain enough support for him to be able to win a referendum next year? Sorry, in 2017, I should say.
It's important to see what the other countries also are ready to do. And indeed, there are two possibilities. It's possible to have a treaty change also because some countries are in favor of deepening the euro area. So that could be a kind of a trade-off. Britain could opt out of some areas. Why not? If it's important for Britain to stay in the European Union. But at the same time, there will be a deepening of the euro area that is certainly important to have a common currency. But that's a more complex system that requires treaty change, that requires negotiation, approval, and ratification by all the countries in Europe. Now, it's also possible to make a more minimal, let's say, change through so-called secondary legislation. That will be certainly easier to get the approval of the other countries, and will be quicker.
Now, I know you're a great football fan. What would you like to see from UEFA next week?
I hope that Mr. Blatter understands that even if there are no specific evidence against him, he has some kind of overall responsibility for the situation in his organization. This is certainly very damaging for the image of FIFA, what has been happening. And so I think it will be wise for him to give, let's say, the opportunity for a reform in his organization.
All right. And finally, very quickly, if I may, Greece may be even closer this week to the exit door. Would you like to see the EU offer a separate deal to help Greece stay inside the euro, as distinct from the IMF loan?
Sometimes I get the impression that people are waiting an accident so that they can really focus to avoid a bigger disaster. It's too long, this time that has been taken to find a solution. I really believe it's important now to find a solution. It will certainly be negative for Greece and for the euro area if there is a default or if there is a Brexit. And I believe it still can be found, that solution can still be found.
We'll wait and see. Mr. Barroso, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.